After a night of chaos, I became the canary of Solomon, a big shot in Beijing's elite circle. It was not until his first love, Lily, returned to the country that I realized. Even a cold-hearted person like Solomon had someone he couldn't forget. Later, I left for a foreign land alone with my pregnancy. And then, for the sake of my 3-year-old daughter, I returned to Beijing. On the night of our reunion, there was another night of chaos. Just like that year. Afterward, I pretended to be calm to relieve the awkwardness. Solomon doesn't seem to be as good as he used to be. Solomon glanced at me infuriately and changed the clean bed sheets. Aurora, you're still the same as before. Useless. It has been 3 years since I've been with Solomon. It seems that I still can't fit into their circle. On the day of the first snowfall in Beijing, Solomon asked me to go to a party with him at night. Because of my pregnancy, I was feeling a bit restless. So I wasted some time. When I arrived at the clubhouse, the private and luxurious banquet hall on the first floor was already filled with elegantly dressed people. I wrapped my coat tighter and stepped onto the steps on the thin layer of snow. Just as I was about to go in, the second young lady of the Zhao family suddenly stopped me. Aurora, I advise you not to go in now, so as not to spoil the fun. I was puzzled and looked up at her. Zhao Ying simply reached out and pulled me to the floor-to-ceiling window at the end. She tilted her chin in a certain direction inside. And then I saw Solomon. And the dazzling young woman beside him. She was looking up at Solomon and saying something. Solomon looked down at her and occasionally nodded with a smile. I knew who she was. She was Lily, an out-and-out socialite in Beijing's elite circle. The first love of many men. And also the person that Solomon had never forgotten since his youth. Zhao Ying looked at me with a bit of pity. Why bother? You'll just be asking for trouble if you go in. I wrapped my thin coat even tighter. I took one last look at Solomon. Lily was laughing and joking with her familiar friends. He stood aside with a glass of wine in his hand, just watching quietly. Somehow, with so many people and so much excitement, he looked indescribably lonely and unrestrained. My heart ached sharply, and I slowly lowered my eyelashes. Okay, I'll go back first. After saying that, I smiled faintly at Zhao Ying and then turned around and went down the steps. It was snowing even harder. My hair was blown into a mess. It was very much like the night when I first met Solomon. And it was also very appropriate for the reunion of those who have never forgotten each other. Solomon wouldn't know that I had been there. Even if he knew, he probably wouldn't have the time to care. I walked a long way before getting into the car. The warm air enveloped me. My hands tightly covered my abdomen. This time, I will take her away. I won't let her turn into a pool of blood and flesh at 6 months pregnant. Never to see the light of day. On the way back, Solomon sent me a message. Not here yet? After thinking for a while, I replied, I seem to have caught a chill. My head hurts. And I don't want to go anymore. Don't drink too much. If it's too late, don't ask the driver to send you back in the snow. Word by word. It was very much in line with the image of the obedient and gentle canary I had been for the past 3 years. Solomon didn't reply again. And there was no phone call either. It was only when I came out after warily removing my makeup and taking a shower. He happened to push open the bedroom door. Covered in snow and wind. The towel in my hand suddenly fell. I don't know why. But my heart suddenly ached. Then my eyes and nose became sore. By the time the tears fell, I had already run over barefoot. I hugged him regardless of everything. In the past 3 years, I had never done such a sudden thing. And I had never shed tears or acted coquettish lie in front of him. But tonight, I just couldn't control myself. I wanted to indulge once. For the last time. Solomon was also obviously taken aback for a moment. But he didn't push me away. He just put one arm around my waist. And with the other hand, he reached out to feel my forehead. Have you taken any medicine? Do you have a fever? I've taken it. I don't have a fever. I buried myself in his arms. I hugged his waist tightly with both hands. What's wrong? Solomon, however, grabbed my wrist and pulled me away from his arms. His face was still as noble and cold as ever. The look in his eyes was even a bit serious. I had tried countless times to peek into his heart, but I couldn't find even a trace of tenderness. Except for those rare moments in bed when he was deeply aroused and would lose his composure a bit. He had received strict elite education since he was a child. He had developed a calm personality during his youth, and his emotions were never shown on his face. I secretly adored him. But at the same time, I was deeply afraid of him from the bottom of my heart. But this time, I didn't want to run away in a hurry. So I summoned up the courage to look up and meet his gaze. I thought you wouldn't come back tonight. Or you would come back very, very late. I'm just really happy. Solomon wiped the tears from my eyelashes. It wasn't a big deal. So I came back. I thought of the lonely look in his eyes when he watched Lily laughing and chatting with others. The soreness in my heart and the indescribable grievance that I could never express. It seemed to spread throughout my body in an instant. Lily probably would never know. The person she didn't care much about was someone I had to look up to with great caution. Dry your hair first. I'm going to take a shower. He let go of me, took off his coat, and was about to turn around and go to the bathroom. But I followed closely behind him. Aurora? Solomon turned around and looked at me as he raised his hand to unbutton his tie. I had always been very obedient. But tonight, I was acting so differently. But I didn't stop. I'll go with you. I mustered up all my courage and looked at him. I want to stay with you all night. He didn't respond. After a while, he handed me his tie. As you wish. Solomon wanted to do it in the bathroom. But I didn't agree. In the middle of his deep kiss, I gasped and leaned on his chest. My head still doesn't feel well. Can we go to the bed? Maybe it was because I was being overly clingy and proactive tonight. Solomon became aroused very quickly. I was almost thrown onto the bed by him. This scared me so much that I started crying immediately and instinctively covered my still flat abdomen. Why are you so prone to crying tonight? Solomon lowered his head and kissed away the tears at the corners of my eyes. I wrapped my arms around his neck. I'm not feeling well. I know. Then can you be gentle tonight? Just like the night we were together for the first time. I saw his sexy Adam's apple rolling violently. When he spoke again, his voice was deep and a bit hoarse. Okay. He kissed me deeply. The force with which he tore open my nightgown was also very strong. But later, maybe because I cried softly, he was especially gentle. But the gentler he was, the more I couldn't resist. After everything was over, Solomon carried me to the sofa. He changed the wet bed sheets. Only then did he look at me. Aurora. There was a faint smile on his face. It's been 3 years. And you still haven't improved at all. You're still so useless. I was so embarrassed that I buried my face in the pillow and didn't dare to look at him anymore. Later, I fell asleep in his arms. I slept on his arm the whole night. On the morning when Solomon was going on a business trip, I got up to see him off. In front of the mirror, as I was tying his tie for him, he suddenly touched my face. Is there any gift you want? I just lowered my eyes and carefully smoothed out every small wrinkle on the tie. Then, I shook my head. He always talked very little. When I shook my head, he didn't ask any more. Just as he was about to turn and leave, I called his name softly. Solomon. I rarely called his name. I always called him Solomon in a proper manner. He stopped and turned to look at me. I was wearing a dressing gown. And my long hair was a bit curly and scattered over my shoulders. I had a slight anemia in the early stages of pregnancy. My lips were also a bit pale. And he was wearing a dark coat. Tall and slender. Noble and handsome. I just felt a burning pain in my heart. My eyes turned red. Solomon's eyebrows furrowed slightly. Almost imperceptibly. I had already taken a step forward and grabbed his hand. Give me a hug, okay? Without hesitation. He put his arms around my waist. I tried my best to lean into his arms, pressing closely against him, until the familiar smell of his body enveloped me completely. My tears fell on the delicate dark patterns of his coat and slowly seeped in. I thoughts already in my heart. Like this. Could it be considered that he had hugged her? That I was being greedy and pulled his hand to press against my abdomen. I seem to be getting my period soon. My stomach hurts a bit. He lowered his eyes. And his warm palm, through the thin layer of silk, pressed against my abdomen. He rubbed it gently. He probably would never know. There was a little girl growing inside. Ask the kitchen to cook some brown sugar water for you to drink. Don't eat anything cold these days. I was stunned for a moment. Solomon seemed to chuckle softly. In the past winters, because the heating at home was extremely warm, I always secretly ate ice cream. I thought Solomon didn't know. Go back to sleep for a while. He raised his wrist to look at his watch. Didn't say anything more. And turned around and walked downstairs quickly. I ran to the window and watched his car drive away. The snow mist kicked up by the wheels covered most of the car. Soon, let out a little sigh. There was nothing left to see. When I left Beijing, I didn't tell anyone, including my best friend from university. Solomon had always thought that my parents had passed away and that I was all alone. But he didn't know that half a year ago, my only aunt suddenly found me. She had no children. And I was her only relative now. She wanted me to go abroad and live with her. Before, I had refused my aunt several times. Because I couldn't bear to leave Solomon. But later, when I started having a dream frequently, after dreaming of my tragic ending, I finally started to waver. I didn't want to be an insignificant supporting actress in Solomon's lone life. First, I would lose my 6-month-old daughter in my womb because of Lily. Then I would be crazy for half my life and finally die quietly. In the end, I would only receive his understated words. I see. Give her a proper burial. However, when I went for a checkup as soon as possible, the doctor in the small clinic told me that I was already pregnant. Everything was too late. But perhaps, everything was still possible. All the procedures for going abroad had been completed. The last trace of reluctance gradually faded away after I saw with my own eyes the scene of him and Lily together that night. I left cleanly. Just like an insignificant drop of water merging into the sea. Not even the slightest ripple was raised. When I left Beijing, I swore that I would never come back. But I didn't expect that in just 3 years, I would set foot in this city again. When I got off the plane, Candy was still holding her most precious pot of cactus. The winter in Beijing was too cold. As soon as the cold wind blew, her little face turned pale, and she started coughing. But she still held on to the small flower pot and refused to let go. Mom, will the cactus bloom in winter? Candy looked up at me, asking me tirelessly. I hugged her tightly, and my tears fell on her black hair. When she grew up a bit and started asking me for her father, I would always coax her like this. Be good, Candy. When the cactus blooms, your father will come back. When she was sick and uncomfortable and refused to have her blood drawn or undergo a bone marrow aspiration, I also lied to her like this. Listen to Uncle Doctor. Candy. After you get the injection, the cactus will bloom. When it blooms, your father will come back to see you. She would always become quiet immediately and stop crying and making a fuss. But that pot of cactus was fake. A plastic plant would never bloom. It was just that my seriously ill Candy was kept in the dark. When we got back to the place of residence, Candy took a shower and then fell asleep. I instructed the 2 nanny aunts to keep an eye on her. Then I went to change my clothes and prepared to put on makeup and go out. Before returning to the country, I specifically made some inquiries. Solomon and Lily were not together yet. He was still single now. But this was normal. In countless old-fashioned romantic novels, the male and female protagonists always have to go through 81 hardships and countless breakups and reconciliations. And all I need is for him to be single now. That night was quite a coincidence. Solomon arrived late. I was cornered in the corridor and harassed by 2 drunk playboys. My skirt was caught by the heel of my shoe, and I could hardly stand steadily. My sideburns were also wet with sweat and disheveled. The man beside me made a move to support me and got very close. I was about to push him away. But before I could, Solomon came out of the elevator with Sunny and the others still following behind him. They happened to run into the scene. His steps paused slightly. His gaze swept across my face. The expressions of the people beside him were all different. But they were all surprised and astonished. The whole process didn't last more than a second. He then shifted his gaze and walked forward without looking sideways. I stared blankly as he passed by. I could even feel a trace of cool chill remaining on his overcoat. But he didn't even give me a sidelong glance. After turning the corner of the corridor, Sonny really couldn't hold back and opened his mouth. Brother. Isn't that Aurora? Solomon didn't respond. You. Really not going to do anything? Solomon took out a cigarette case and lit a cigarette. He stopped and looked at Sonny. In the curling smoke, his handsome features were a bit blurred. Sonny couldn't see his expression clearly and was extremely anxious. He wished he could get into Solomon's mind to see what he was really thinking. But Solomon had already stubbed out the cigarette. There was not a trace of expression on his face. I'm not going to care. Sonny still wanted to say something. Solomon raised his hand to interrupt. Let's go. Out of sight. Out of mind. The others could only follow. But after walking a few steps, a very faint cry of a woman suddenly came. It was intermittent. Sobbing. As if a silk thread had wrapped around people's hearts. Solomon suddenly stopped in his tracks. Sonny's heart also rose. In an instant, Solomon had turned around and returned. Sonny saw his face. His lips tightly pursed. And blue veins faintly protruding from his forehead. There was a hidden anger clearly showing in his eyes. Just at this moment, the woman's crying suddenly grew louder. The calm expression on Solomon's face finally cracked bit by bit. Ignoring everything else, he quickly ran in the direction of the crying. Sonny and the others looked at each other, seemingly all shaking their heads and sighing. But they also quickly followed. When Solomon and the others arrived, I was curled up in the corner, with blood on my skirt and face. I was looking at the man lying on the ground in front of me with tears all over my face, in a state of panic and helplessness. The vase was broken, and the man's forehead was also smashed open. Blood covered his face, and his breath was faint. I was so frightened that my face turned deathly pale, and my whole body was shaking. It wasn't until Solomon quickly came to my side. The thick overcoat on his body, still with the warmth of his body, fell on my shoulders. Only then did I suddenly come to my senses and looked up at him. Tears fell from my eyes. And when I opened my mouth, my voice was already hoarse. Solomon? Where are you injured? His slender fingers brushed aside the disheveled hair on my face, not caring that they were stained with bloodstains. He looked at me a bit nervously. His eyebrows furrowed tightly. The look in his eyes was filled with anxious worry. But he was clearly the most clean freak. And he was clearly the one who least showed his emotions. I couldn't say anything. I just shook my head with tears in my eyes. When Solomon spoke again, his voice became even gentler. Don't be afraid. I'll take you to the hospital right away. He bent down and wanted to pick me up, but I gently tugged at the sleeve of his shirt. Solomon. I'm okay. It's him. I might have killed him. I pointed at the man lying on the ground. His breathing seemed to be about to stop. Extreme fear and terror swept over me again. I thought of the sick Candy. If I went to prison, what would happen to Candy? I couldn't help but tug at Solomon's sleeve and cried so hard that my face was unrecognizable. Solomon. I'm scared. Aurora. Don't worry. He's not dead. He's just bleeding a bit. Sonny bent down to check the man's breath and then casually interjected. Really? Sonny nodded. I've already asked someone to call an ambulance. Solomon glanced at Sonny and the others, and then directly picked me up. You guys stay here and clean up the mess. Don't worry. Brother. You just accompany Aurora. Sonny looked at me and then at Solomon, with an expression of someone watching the drama. Solomon gave him a cold look. Sonny shrank his neck and stood still obediently. When we got into the elevator, I came back to my senses a bit and wanted to get down from his arms. Solomon. Thank you for what happened just now. Solomon didn't let go. Let's go to the hospital first. I'm not injured. I don't need to go to the hospital. Solomon didn't say anything. He just lowered his eyes and looked at my hand. Only then did I notice the small wound on the back of my hand. It might have been caused by the broken vase just now. And it wasn't serious. I can deal with this minor injury myself. I don't need to go to the hospital. Solomon ignored me. After getting out of the elevator, he carried me to the car. He directly instructed the driver to go to the nearest hospital. He sat beside me and returned to the way I was most familiar with in the past. detached and cold, unapproachable. It was as if the worry and nervousness he showed towards me just now were all my illusions. I looked out of the car window, looking a bit dazed. It was winter again. It was going to snow in Beijing again. I really hated this season. It was already 9 o'clock in the evening when the doctor finished treating the wound on my hand. My phone rang several times. They were all voice messages sent to me by Candy. She always looked for me the moment she woke up. But with Solomon around, I didn't dare to open and listen. My heart was extremely anxious. I was worried that Candy would be sad if she couldn't get my response. I was even more worried about her health, whether there was anything uncomfortable with her. Aurora. Solomon suddenly called my name. I instinctively looked up and responded. The winter in Beijing was very cold. And the night was even colder. He was standing in the cold wind wearing only a thin shirt. After not seeing each other for 3 years. He looked thinner and more solemn. My heart seemed to be tightly clenched by a big hand. Dense pain swept over me. But underneath that pain, there was an overwhelming sense of grievance that couldn't be suppressed. Since he had someone he liked in his heart, why did he stay with me for 3 years? Since he didn't like me, why was there always so much entanglement between us in bed? On every festival, big or small, he would give me precious gifts. Even if I was just a canary to amuse him. But there was also the affection of 3 years of love and tenderness. Why could he be so heartless as to watch me lose the 6-month-old baby in my belly? Watch me become crazy and die miserably? Solomon, in those days after my death, did you ever think of me? Who once slept with you snuggled up, even for a second? But I would never ask these questions again. Now, the most important thing in my life was only Candy. I took a deep breath and looked at him calmly. Solomon, I really appreciate what you did today. If you hadn't helped me deal with the aftermath, I wouldn't have known how to end it. Is that so? Solomon suddenly interrupted my polite words. He looked down at me. How does Aurora plan to thank me? I was stunned for a moment and instinctively pursed my lips. Or is Aurora going to brush me off with a few polite words? I didn't mean that. Then what does Aurora mean? How does Solomon want me to thank him? I was still wearing his overcoat, which was heavy and very warm. The night wind blew, and his thin shirt bulged slightly. I could vaguely see his narrow and strong waist. I turned my face away and raised my hand to pinch my slightly hotter lobby. Thinking of my purpose of returning to the country. Thinking of Candy's illness. Finally, having fulfilled my fiancé, I made up my mind. I slowly took a step forward. Solomon stood still. My heart started beating very fast. Like a drum. I don't know where I got the courage. I actually walked right up to him. Raised my hand. And gently hugged his narrow waist. Solomon, I have nothing to give you. If you don't mind. But I couldn't finish my words. Because Solomon had already lowered his head and kissed me. The driver took us to a residence closest to the hospital. The entire top floor of the high-end apartment in the city center belonged to him alone. In the private elevator, Solomon didn't say a word. He just pressed me against the cold elevator wall and kissed me deeply and passionately. When my consciousness was in a daze, I was thinking in my mind. In these 3 years, had he been with other women? Lily? Or someone else? Actually, it had nothing to do with me. But I just couldn't help thinking about it. My chest was filled with bitterness and soreness. And it ached. But I was also lured into a state of confusion by his skillful kiss. I clearly hoped that he would be moved. But when he was truly moved, I felt wronged. With a ding, the elevator door opened. Solomon's kiss landed on the corner of my eye. The salty tears were sucked away. His forehead pressed against mine. Aurora, why are you crying? I couldn't answer. I just hugged his waist tighter. The wound hurts a bit. His body tensed for a moment. He stared fixedly into my eyes. But then a trace of self-mockery slowly emerged. I suddenly remembered. When I left 3 years ago. The last few words I said to him. I also deceived him like this. Before being with him, I always thought that Solomon was a very ascetic person. After being with him, I realized how ridiculous the rumors outside were. He had strong desires. There was always a constant demand between us in bed. But if I couldn't bear it, As long as I pleaded with him softly with a crying voice. Even if he was out of control, he would become gentle and patiently coax me. But this time, no matter how much I cried or pleaded, he wouldn't let me go. In the end, my throat was hoarse from crying. There were streaks of tears on my face. But Solomon still showed no signs of stopping. I couldn't stand that kind of lingering. Wave after wave of pleasure. It made me suffer as if I was almost dehydrated. My sideburns were soaked through, and my fingertips dug into the tense muscles on his forearm. I was like someone fished out of the water. When my consciousness was in a mess, I blurted out for self-help, "Husband." The violent attack suddenly stopped. Instead, there were delicate kisses falling on my eyebrows and the corners of my eyes. When I was choking back my sobs, Solomon hugged me tightly. "Aurora. Call me husband again. I'll let you go tonight." But I didn't just call him once. Because Solomon broke his promise for the first time. I called him many times. He still wouldn't stop. But he became much gentler. I didn't know when I passed out. Maybe I just fell asleep because I was too tired. When I suddenly woke up in the middle of the night, I found that, just like every time before, I was lying in his arms, sleeping with my head on his arm. He was also sleeping soundly. But even in his sleep, his eyebrows were still slightly furrowed. I couldn't help but raise my hand, wanting to smooth out the wrinkles between his eyebrows. But as soon as my fingertips landed, he tightly grasped my hand. "Aurora." Solomon didn't open his eyes. It seemed like he was just mumbling in his dream. But this murmur made me stunned and sad. Liar. In his dream, he shook off my hand again. "I don't want to see you again. Ever. Solomon." I called his name in a daze. But he didn't respond at all. I lowered my eyes and smiled. Before the tears fell, I got up and went to the bathroom. There were a lot of messages on my phone. The nanny said that since I didn't reply, Candy had been holding the phone and waiting for me. It was almost 1 o'clock in the morning. 5 minutes ago, Candy sent me the last voice message. "Mom. Candy misses you so much. Candy loves Mom the most. But Candy is so sleepy now and really wants to go to bed." Listening to Candy's childish baby voice, my heart was instantly filled with sweetness. Mom misses Candy so much too and loves Candy so much. "Then do you love me the most?" Candy quickly replied with another message. Of course. Of course I love you the most. I love you the most." As soon as the words fell, I suddenly seemed to sense something. I turned my head a bit stiffly. And then I saw Solomon standing outside the door. He looked at me calmly. There was not the slightest fluctuation in his expression. But there was a frost-like coldness in his eyes. I knew that he had heard the voice message I just sent. He might have misunderstood something. However, compared to letting him know about Candy's existence, I would rather he misunderstand. He doesn't love me. Naturally, he wouldn't care about Candy either. In the end of the story, he would eventually have a happy ending with Lily. Candy's existence would make Lily feel awkward and put him in a difficult position. And the father that Candy wants is a father who truly loves and dotes on her. But Solomon wouldn't give her that. I held back the soreness in my heart and smiled at him. "So you heard it all." Solomon didn't say anything. "I should go back now. Thank you for what happened today. Are we even now?" "Aurora." Solomon finally spoke. His voice was surprisingly calm. "Just go. Don't let me see you again in the future." I also thought that would be the last time I saw Solomon. Because the day we met was the ovulation period I deliberately calculated. I'm the type of person who gets pregnant easily. Because Candy was an accidental pregnancy. It's just a pity that this time, God didn't favor me again. My period came on time. My hope was shattered in an instant. And Candy couldn't stand the harsh winter climate in Beijing and got sick again. On the way to the hospital with the nanny, she fell into a coma in my arms while holding that plastic cactus. I kept calling her pet name. And tears streamed down my face, wetting her soft and chubby little face. But she didn't open her eyes or respond to me. She just held that pot of cactus tightly. I used a bit of strength to pry her fingers open. When we arrived at the hospital, the emergency nurse had already pushed a stretcher bed and was waiting. "Are you the parent of the little girl Candy?" Yes, having fulfilled my obsession. I'm her mother. Okay. Please go through the procedures with us immediately. The expert diagnosis and treatment team of our hospital is already in place, and the consultation will start soon. I was confused. But at this moment, I didn't have time to think too much. After hurriedly following the nurse to go through various procedures, Candy had already been sent to the emergency room. Only then did I have the chance to ask, "Excuse me, what's going on with the consultation organized by the expert diagnosis and treatment team?" The nurse shook her head. "Sorry, Aurora. I'm just doing my job according to the hospital's arrangements." I called my aunt. It wasn't my aunt who arranged this in the hospital either. I couldn't help but think of Solomon. But I couldn't help but deny this thought. Over the years, I often had that nightmare. In the dream, Solomon watched the fetus in my belly turn into a pool of blood and flesh. But he didn't even frown. He said, "Aurora, I've told you many times. I don't like children. This is your own doing." Yes, adding fulfilled my obsession. A long time ago. I also asked him as if by chance. He really answered like that. He said he didn't like children because they were noisy. Of course. Maybe he just liked the children that Lily would give birth to for him. I smiled, self-deprecating lie. In fact, at first, I didn't believe that absurd dream either. It was only after everything in the dream came true one by one, I had to believe it. In this story, I'm just a beautiful cannon fodder supporting actress. And in a romantic story, the supporting actress will always be the loser to the female lead. When Candy woke up, the first heavy snowfall of the year fell in Beijing. The doctor suggested that she should have a hematopoietic stem cell transplantation as soon as possible. If the illness relapses several more times in such a dangerous state, the situation will be very bad. She was still a bit weak. But when she saw the cactus placed by the bedside, her eyes lit up again. "Mom, will the cactus still bloom?" I felt a sharp pain in my eyes. Holding her soft little body, tears streamed down my face. Yes, heading so my obsession. "Candy. This time, it definitely will." "I think so too." Candy's face was pale, but her eyes were shining brightly. "You know what, Mom? I had a really long dream this time. I dreamt of Dad. He was so tall and handsome." Candy pointed at the door of the ward. He was holding Alina Bell and pushed the door open. I recognized him at a glance. "Yeah, I was tapped. He is really tall and handsome. Just like in your dream." "But Mom, doesn't Dad like me? Is it because I'm sick?" This was the first time Candy asked me like this. She was a bit nervous and uneasy. With her mouth tightly pursed. She was both eager and timid. Looking at her, I felt as if my heart was being torn apart. At that moment, there was only one desperate thought in my mind. I wanted to fulfill Candy's wish. I wanted this dream of hers to come true. No matter what the cost was. I went to the villa where I had lived for 3 years. I wasn't sure if Solomon would still be living here. But during this period, Solomon had declined all his social engagements. I couldn't meet him the way I did last time. I could only use the stupidest method, which was to wait. The first snow in Beijing gradually became thicker. I stood on the side of the road, looking at the cars passing by from time to time. The front section was a private road, and I couldn't get in. I could only wait here. When it was getting dark, I didn't wait for Solomon, but I waited for Lily. Her car had originally driven past for a short distance, but then it reversed back. The car window was rolled down halfway, and Lily was sitting in the back seat, looking at me with a half smile. "Aurora?" Her tone was a bit casual. It was as if she was mentioning something insignificant. I was almost frozen stiff, with my cheeks cold and numb. My heart was beating very slowly and sluggishly, and it took a long time for it to beat. And a stinging pain spread. "What are you doing here?" As she asked, she raised her hand and flipped her hair. I naturally saw the diamond ring on her middle finger. "You're not waiting for Solomon, are you?" "Yes, but I too. I'm waiting for Solomon. I have something very important to talk to him about." Lily suddenly sneered. "I advise you not to be delusional. Solomon won't be back tonight. I'm back to get something for him and will go to meet him soon." I lowered my head and didn't respond. I just stood there stubbornly without moving. Lily seemed a bit anxious. Aurora. I'm just being kind to tell you this. Even if you wait here all night and freeze to death, it will be in vain. Look. It's not easy to get a taxi here. I'll give you a ride. Lily. I interrupted her. Thank you for your kindness. But no. Thanks. I'll just wait here. Lily's face suddenly turned a bit ugly. She looked at me for a while, before rolling up the car window. The car slowly drove forward and disappeared around the corner. About 10 minutes later, several men who looked like security guards suddenly came over to drive me away. I argued reasonably, having fulfilled my unsip. I'm not standing on the private road in front. This is a public road. There's no law that says I can't stand here, right? Sorry. We received a complaint from the resident. Please leave immediately. But those people didn't listen to me at all. They even started to pull me. Just then, wet on a little sorry. On the main road not far away, a black Bentley suddenly drove over. The bright headlights pierced the night, and also the falling snowflakes in the sky. The few people immediately moved aside to avoid it. I also instinctively raised my hand to block the blinding light. The car drove past me. There was no sign of stopping. But I recognized that car. It was the car that Solomon used most often. There were also traces of my lovemaking with him in that car. I slowly put my hand down in a daze. The security guards came over again to pull me away. But the car that had driven away suddenly stopped steadily. The driver got out of the car first, held an umbrella, and opened the car door. Solomon bent down and got out of the car, taking the black umbrella from the driver's hand. The snowflakes fell quietly on the surface of the silk umbrella. It was very similar to that night 3 years ago. He was also wearing a long black coat, with his eyebrows and eyes clear and stern, and the lines of his profile sharp and smooth, under the shimmering light and shadow. The hand holding the umbrella had long and slender knuckles. There was nothing on the middle finger. And there was no ring. Only on the sleeve exposed on his wrist. One could vaguely see the faint light from the sapphire cufflinks. My eyes suddenly became hot. And tears almost rolled down. That was the birthday gift I bought for him in the first year we were together. I don't know when those security guards slipped away. The driver also sensibly avoided from a distance. Solomon held the umbrella and walked up to me. The umbrella tilted over, shielding me from the falling snow and wind. Aurora. I told you not to let me see you again. His voice was still calm, without the slightest warmth, but it didn't make me feel distant and cold. He raised his hand. His fingertips landed on the top of my head. The cold snowflakes were brushed away by his fingers. My tears suddenly fell. Sorry, Solomon. However, I want to ask you for a favor. Just one thing. Then, what are the say? I promise that I will never, ever let you see me again. Okay. He replied quickly, but then his tone changed. However, you said you would beg me. How exactly? I slowly lowered my eyelashes. The snow that had landed on my long eyelashes had somehow turned into ice crystals. When hot tears fell, they melted along with the ice. Everything was hazy. I bit my lip. You tell me. I'll do as you say. The whole house was almost exactly the same as it was 3 years ago. Even the servants in the house were familiar faces. They were initially a bit surprised when they saw me. But they quickly returned to normal. There was hot porridge and midnight snacks prepared in the kitchen. They were all my favorite flavors from the past. Hot water was drawn in the bathroom. And a bubble bath and essential oils were prepared. It was the lavender scent I liked. My dressing table in the master bedroom was also just as it used to be. The skincare brands I was used to using were replaced with the latest products and neatly arranged there. In the cloakroom, the dresses and skirts in my size had also been replaced with new items from the new season. But my favorite sets of pajamas were still there. Time seemed to have frozen 3 years ago. It was as if it had suddenly been turned back to 3 years ago overnight. I felt like I was in a dream. But it wasn't the nightmare that had haunted me for years. After taking a shower, I changed into my favorite bathrobe. It was white lace, inlaid with layers of frills, designed in a complicated court style. The long skirt hem fell all the way to the top of my feet. It was only when I came out after changing that I suddenly remembered. On the day I was going to leave 3 years ago, When I parted with Solomon, I seemed to be wearing this very bathrobe. But it was too late to change. Solomon was sitting on the sofa in the master bedroom and was looking up at me. I was a bit at a loss for a moment. But he just said calmly, "Go and dry your hair first." As I was drying my hair in front of the mirror, my thoughts were suddenly pulled back to reality. This wasn't 3 years ago anymore. The person in the mirror no longer had that long curly hair that reached down to the waist. To take care of Candy more conveniently, I had long ago reluctantly cut my long hair. Now it only just reached my shoulders. My hair was quickly dried to a semi-dry state. When I put down the hair dryer, Solomon suddenly hugged my waist from behind. His hot palm landed on my flat abdomen and gently rubbed. "Is your period about to come?" I was stunned. It took me a while to come to my senses. Things were always so coincidental. 3 years ago, my menstrual cycle was indeed like this. But later, after giving birth to Candy and then suffering day and night because of her illness, my menstrual cycle had long been in a complete mess. It had only stabilized in the past 6 months. He didn't know that these days, it was almost my ovulation period. However, I never expected. No matter what, I never expected. Solomon actually still remembered this day. In the mirror, my eyes gradually turned red. "You still remember?" "Yeah," he responded, lowered his head and kissed my ear. "Why did you cut your hair short?" I bit my tongue tip to hold back my sobs. "I got tired of having long hair. So I cut it." The big hand around my waist suddenly tightened. Solomon suddenly bit my neck lightly. "Aurora. So, is it that when people get tired of someone, they can just discard them casually?" His voice was a bit low, and I didn't hear it clearly. I asked instinctively, "What did you say?" But he didn't answer me. Just like that night, he picked me up and gently threw me onto the big bed. But this time, I didn't cover my abdomen anymore. I didn't beg him to be gentle out of fear. Instead, I raised my arm and softly hooked his neck. "Solomon, are you 32 years old this year?" "Yeah." I pursed my lips and smiled, and the dimples at the corners of my mouth were faintly visible. They say that men start to go downhill after they turn 30. He also smiled, the corners of his lips curling slightly. His long fingers lifted the complicated hem of my skirt and then moved upward all the way. "Why don't you give it a try?" I, very unfortunately, cried out husband, again. There were deep finger marks pinched on my waist. There was also a faint stinging pain on my buttocks. I really don't know where he got these strange tastes in the past 3 years. I lay on the pillow, gasping for breath. But I still stubbornly said, "Solomon doesn't seem as good as he used to be." Solomon glanced at me. He got out of bed, picked up my limp body, and placed me on the sofa beside. He casually pulled off the sheet that was wet in one area. "Aurora, you're still the same as you were 3 years ago." Weak. My face instantly turned red. Thinking of this scene that had happened countless times in those 3 years, my neck gradually became hot. Solomon changed the clean sheet. When he carried me back to the bed, he suddenly whispered something in my ear. It was that dirty suggestive word that he had said many times during our intimate moments 3 years ago, which always made my face hot and my heart race. The next day, heading facade my session, Solomon and I bought a Linabelle together and went to the hospital. On the way, I thought about it for a long time before I opened my mouth. Well, the little girl is really pitiful. She hasn't seen her father since she was born. I adopted her. She's very sick now. She dreamed that her father came to the hospital to see her. In the dream, her father was very tall and handsome. Solomon, you know, I don't have many acquaintances in Beijing. And among those who are tall and handsome, you're the only one I know. I'm not very good at telling lies. So I didn't dare to look Solomon in the eye from beginning to end. It will at most waste 10 minutes of your time. Or maybe 5 minutes. Is that okay? Solomon didn't respond. He just stroked the ears of the Linabelle. Does she have any other wishes? I blurted out. She most wants her father to take her to an amusement park. Solomon nodded. I'll clear my schedule for today. Solomon? I looked at him in disbelief. Didn't he hate children the most? Or rather, a child who, in his opinion, had nothing to do with him. The Solomon family has many charity projects every year. Aurora. I'm not a heartless person either. I was both happy and sad. Happy that Candy would surely be extremely happy today. Sad because, after all, dreams always have to end. Next time, how am I going to help Candy fulfill her dream? After all, he was just treating today's matter as a charity act. Solomon waited outside the ward. I went into the ward first. Candy seemed to be in much better spirits today. And the pot of cactus at the head of her bed actually had colorful little flowers on it. The nanny quickly explained. I cut them out of colored paper, trying to make Candy happy. Before she finished speaking, her eyes turned red first. Candy also looked at me a bit nervously, with tears welling up in her eyes. I couldn't help it and hugged her tightly. Candy, be a good girl. The cactus really did bloom. Fake flowers are still flowers. Right? Mom? Candy suddenly opened her eyes wide. With tears in my eyes. I smiled at her. Daddy's back. Candy. Look at the door. The door of the ward was pushed open from the outside at the right moment. Solomon walked in with big strides, holding a huge Lena Bell doll in his arms. He was wearing a black mid-length overcoat. He was tall and handsome. Candy was sitting on the hospital bed, opening her small mouth bit by bit. She had to tilt her head back to see her father's entire face. Solomon walked to the bedside and handed the Lena Bell to Candy. But Candy forgot to take it. She just stared at him with her eyes wide open. Then, let out a lull sigh. Her big, round eyes quickly filled with tears. Those tears kept welling up and soon covered her face. She started crying silently. But when Solomon wiped her tears, the silent crying quickly turned into a loud wail. She threw herself into Solomon's arms regardless. The needle on the back of her hand moved, and a lot of blood flowed back into the infusion tube. I was so scared that I quickly called the nurse over. When the needle was inserted again, Candy was very delicate and kept crying. She looked at Solomon pitifully, asking him to comfort her and blow on the injection site. Solomon didn't have any experience in comforting children, but he was extremely patient. Candy kept snuggling in his arms, and he held her a bit clumsily all the time. Whenever Candy shed a tear, he would hold her chubby little hand and blow on it for her, until Candy fell asleep. I wanted to step forward and carry Candy back to the bed, but Solomon raised his hand to stop me. He lowered his eyes and looked at Candy, tenderly brushing aside the stray hair on her forehead. In her sleep, Candy was still holding onto his sleeve tightly and wouldn't let go. The nanny had already gone out. At this moment, there were only the three of us in the room. I looked at this scene in front of me almost greedily. I wished I could engrave it in my heart. Aurora. Solomon suddenly looked at me. What's her name? Candy. I know. What's her full name? Candy. How old is she? Almost 3 years old. Was it hard for you when you gave birth to her? It wasn't hard. I suddenly stopped and stared at Solomon with wide eyes. He also stared at me intently. His thin lips were tightly pursed into a line, and his eyes were bloodshot. Aurora. How long do you still plan to hide this from me? You already know? I looked at him nervously. Solomon. I didn't get pregnant on purpose. It was an accident. When I found out I was pregnant, she was already 3 months along. I couldn't bear to abort her. I had to take her away. I was so flustered that I didn't know how to explain, and my words gradually became jumbled. But she's sick. Very sick. The doctor said she needs a hematopoietic stem cell transplant. The best option is cord blood. So I had to come back to the country. Solomon. I'm sorry. I promise. I'll take her abroad immediately. I won't cause you any trouble. Take her abroad? Solomon said almost through gritted teeth. Where are you going to take my daughter? Isn't it enough that we, father and daughter, have been separated for 3 years? Solomon. What did you say? I looked at him in disbelief. You said she's your daughter? Of course she's my daughter. Solomon seemed to be angered into a laugh by my words. Aurora. What makes you think I would abandon my own daughter? But you did abandon her. All the grievances and suppression seemed to suddenly find an outlet and gushed out. I cried and told him all those dreams that had come true one by one. Everything in the dream really happened. You do have a first love. Lily. She's still your first love. She did come back to the country in the winter 3 years ago. You threw a welcome back party for her. Everyone said you were going to get married. That it was going to be an arranged marriage. I did get pregnant. But you didn't want that child. And you didn't want me either. You said you hated children. When she was 6 months along, I was pushed downstairs by Lily and had a miscarriage by accident. But you didn't believe me. You only believed her. After losing the child, I went crazy. I wanted to take revenge on Lily and ended up losing my own life. But until I died, you didn't even take a look at me. In your story, I was just a dispensable supporting actress. So, I was too afraid to let you know that I was pregnant. That's why I took her and went abroad. I wanted to change the ending of the story in my dream for my daughter and myself. I was crying so hard that I could hardly speak. Solomon looked at me as if he had heard some absurd joke. Aurora. Just because of such a dream. You left me and ran away for 3 years? But everything in the dream happened just as it was in the dream. Solomon shook his head and laughed bitterly. Then let me ask you. Did I marry Lily? I was stunned for a moment. And then I thought of the ring on Lily's hand last night. Also, the words she said. But she went to your house last night. No. When I went back with Solomon, we didn't see Lily. Solomon sneered. Lily went to her aunt's house. Her aunt lives next door to my house. Also, having fulfilled my incession. There's something you said just now that's not right. Lily is not my first love. Nor was she ever. It's true that I hosted a welcome dinner for her. But that was also out of respect for my deceased friend. Lily was his first love and his fiancé. But he passed away unexpectedly before they could get married. Also, the night she came back to the country. She said some inexplicable things to me. But I didn't agree. At that time, I was constantly thinking about that little ungrateful girl, who was sick and uncomfortable. So I left the welcome dinner not long after it started. Aurora. You were so sweet that night. Making me spin in circles. It turns out that you wanted to abandon me. I didn't. I wasn't. I was just too scared. I weakly defended myself. Okay. We can let those things go. But what about our daughter? Why did you think that I wouldn't want my own biological daughter? Do you think I'm such a heartless person? I didn't dare to look him in the eye at all. I could only turn my face away and respond in a low voice. That's how it's written in novels. A canary is nothing important. Of course. Her child is also insignificant. Aurora. Solomon seemed to be angered into laughter by my words. Fine. Even in a novel. But I'm also a human being. I have emotions and desires. My heart is made of flesh and blood too. We were together for 3 years. Why do you think that I have no feelings for you at all? I looked at him with red eyes. Solomon. I just thought that we couldn't resist the plot of the story. He didn't say anything more. He just gently kissed our daughter's forehead, placed her on the bed, and covered her with the quilt. Then he got up and walked up to me. I wanted to dodge. But he hugged me tightly. Aurora. Then let's start from this moment. Trust me. Trust your daughter's father. Trust yourself. Trust that we will firmly hold the following plot and the ending of the story in our own hands. Okay? I couldn't help but look into his eyes. They were deep, peaceful, and powerful enough to embrace everything. I couldn't help but nod. And like being bewitched, I nodded vigorously. When Solomon lowered his head and wanted to kiss me, Candy suddenly called out softly, Daddy, are you leaving? Solomon and I quickly turned around and went back to the bedside. Candy was sleepy-eyed. She looked at Solomon, then at me, and then smiled with her little mouth. She stretched out her hand. And Solomon and I held her little hand together. Daddy. Mommy, cut in fulfilled session. Candy loves you the most. Do you love me the most too? Solomon seemed to be taken aback for a moment. He turned to look at me. I looked at him with tears in my eyes, and nodded slightly at him. Yes, having fulfilled my session. We love you the most. The most. Solomon's eyes were a bit red. He held my hand and Candy's hand tightly together. Daddy loves Candy the most. And Mommy the most. I love you both the most. Candy closed her eyes happily and fell asleep sweetly. Solomon pulled me into his arms. He lowered his head and kissed away the tears at the corner of my eye. Aurora. You have no idea how much I hated you during those 3 years. And now? I responded to his kiss and asked him softly. Solomon didn't answer. But he just kissed me deeper and deeper. What kind of night is this? Outside the window. Everything was covered in silver and white. Only the frost and snow know the answer. Epilogue 3 months later. Candy had an operation in Beijing. The cell transplantation operation was a great success. Solomon put a lot of effort into it and invited the top experts from both home and abroad. Candy recovered very well. On her 4th birthday, Solomon proposed to me. I didn't hesitate to say yes. That engagement ring, which was 3 years late, he gently put it on my middle finger. A long time later, I accidentally learned from Sonny that, in fact, when I left that year, Solomon went abroad to look for me right away. But unfortunately, he happened to see me chatting and laughing with my aunt's incredibly handsome Italian boyfriend. He was such a proud person that he was so angry that he took a plane back to the country overnight. After that, he never allowed anyone around him to mention my name. Until I came back to the country because of Candy's illness. We met again in that corridor. Sonny said that when he saw me, he knew that his brother was going to be smitten again. Sure enough, as soon as I started crying, he turned around. And that wasn't the first time in his life that he turned around for me. A long time ago, and a long time from now, he would always unconditionally compromise again and walk towards me without hesitation. Even his beloved Candy had been jealous and acted coy to this lie because of this. She often said, "Daddy is lying. Daddy clearly loves Mommy the most. But he still says he loves me the most." At that time, Solomon would always lovingly stroke her hair and coax her, "Daddy of course loves you the most." But when Candy turned around and ran away, he would immediately hold me in his arms and kiss me gently. "Aurora, it's snowing." "Really? Let me go and take a look." I broke free from him and walked towards the window. He hugged my waist from behind and laughed softly in my ear. "Yes. Only the snow in Beijing knows that I love you the most." Many years ago. He left the welcome dinner in a hurry. The car sped home through the snow and wind. Lily's calls kept coming in. He hung up on each one and finally blocked her number. All he could think about was the person at home. The heating was turned up to high, and she always secretly ate ice cream. She would have a stomachache during her period. Thinking of this, he urged the driver to go faster. Even faster. When he got home, he pushed open the door. Aurora had red eyes. She was a bit surprised and a bit aggrieved. She ran over barefoot and threw herself into his arms. He caught her firmly. He thought that all he wanted in his life was just this one moment. The end.